You know, we're all out there working for animals. We try to speak up on their behalf. We try to help them out. We try to make sure that they're fed and we try to make sure that they're not abused. We have chosen not to eat them, wear them, or exploit them in any way that we know how. But you know what? There are some people who actually represent them. There are some people who can act as the animal's consigliere. Ooh, what a great feeling that must be. Hi, everybody. I am Victoria Moran, and you are listening to the Main Street Vegan Podcast. Vanessa Shakib. Now, a little bit about Vanessa before you can hear straight from her that her claim to fame was originally representing the family of Cedar the goat. Do you remember that one? That was from 2022, a lawsuit that resulted in a $300,000 settlement after deputies illegally seized and slaughtered a young girl's 4-H pet goat. Vanessa is the co-founder and co-director for Advancing Law for Animals, a nonprofit law firm directed to protecting non-human animals. Her work has been featured by CNN, Fox News, The Washington Post, the LA Times, the New York Times, USA Today, The Guardian, and she's with us here today. Welcome, Vanessa.
Victoria, thank you for the warm welcome and the kind words, and thank you for having me on today.
What a pleasure to meet you. I have always been fascinated by animal law attorneys. I actually met an attorney who didn't even know there was such a thing as animal law, but afterwards got more interested in this sort of thing. So tell us, how did you start out when you were going to law school? Did you know that you were going to be representing the interests of animals?
I didn't. I never would have predicted that my career would have taken the path that it has taken. And to the point of the lawyer that you spoke to, many lawyers, many judges, many law students have no idea about this small but growing multidisciplinary field. And so, in addition to practicing animal law, I'm so passionate about educating the bench and the bar about this field. And it's important for lawyers and young lawyers and law students to know that how you start your career might not be how you uh, end your career, and who knows what the path is in the middle. Myself, I never thought that I would be an animal lawyer. I also never thought that I would explode my traditional legal career to start a nonprofit law firm for animals with my co-founder. It just organically developed this way as a longtime animal lover. I think I was about 6 years into my practice, and I thought, I am just a passion-based creature. I need an everyday, I need a job, I need a why that resonates. My biggest passion is animals. And so when I thought I've got to switch things up, I want to pursue animal advocacy. And I thought, well, how can I do that? And I'm like, well, I'm a damn good lawyer. So might as well be a lawyer for animals.
Oh, wow. So I think when people hear about this for the first time, they're thinking, huh? I mean, my
Mhm.
dog can't call you up. So what does it mean to be a lawyer for animals?
This is such a great question because you're exactly right. An animal in need sadly cannot pick up the phone and call a lawyer or anyone for help. And in fact, courts haven't recognized to date animals as individuals having the capacity to sue on their own behalf. So, what does an animal lawyer do? Who are their clients? It's a really big question, actually, because animals touch every area of our lives. And it surprises a lot of people to know that animals also touch every area of the law. If we even think very simply, a person in estate planning is going to consider what would happen upon the death or incapacitation of an individual with companion animals, and how might those animals be cared for upon that animal's death. A lawyer practicing family law might want to account for companion animals in a prenup, in a postnup, and certainly couples breaking up may fight about animals during their divorce. So a lawyer practicing personal injury, for example, might consider injuries involving animals. And then if we take a bigger step back and we think in the advocacy space, we think about impact litigation, which is, okay, we want to think bigger than a lawsuit. We want to think about a business practice. We want to think about the way the government runs. We want to think about how can we file a lawsuit to help animals with an impact broader than the four corners of our lawsuit, right? And so in those kinds of cases, we end up with a number of practice areas. You might think about consumer protection, how products involving animals are labeled. You might think about administrative law. Excuse me, I'm losing my earpiece. We have a little malfunction. We might think about administrative law, how federal agencies regulating animals conduct themselves. We might think about constitutional law. How do governments handle animals or animal advocate speech? And so when we really start realizing animals touch every area of our lives, we really can light up those connections and see how they touch every area of law.
Hmm. Well, tell us about your landmark case. When I hear about this little girl and the 4-H, it really takes me back. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, so I never lived rurally. I was never in 4-H or any of that myself. But at that time, the Future Farmers Convention came every year to Kansas City. Then it moved to Indianapolis. But I remember doing demonstrations there in the early 1970s. And
Oh,
that was
wow.
so unusual that anybody would be protesting about farmed animals at that time that I learned years later, playing around on Google, that it was picked up by the Boston Globe and the LA Times and these faraway newspapers. It just seemed like such an odd thing to do. But for me, it was always such a heart-rending idea that children would grow up coming to love these animals and then being torn apart from them. So tell us about this case. Tell us the story.
It's quite the story. The Cliff Notes version is we have a 9-year-old girl who signs up for the 4-H program, and as part of that, her family purchases a baby goat who she names Cedar. She cares for him daily. She walks him, she feeds him, she grooms him, she plays with him. Understandably, she falls in love with him as she would have a dog or a cat. And so in the 4-H program, in the particular program that my client was involved in, it ends with what's called a youth livestock auction. This is a fascinating auction, and I want to stress that it's a government administered kids club. In this auction, the child exhibits the animal, but what is unique about this auction is a buyer is told that the buyer cannot purchase an animal. The buyer is told that the buyer is only entitled to that animal's meat. And so, right. And it's a very interesting requirement because if a buyer is paying the purchase price, what does the youth livestock auction care if that buyer leaves with a live animal or if that buyer leaves with that animal's meat? But the program has an ideological agenda, right? They're forcing purchases of the animal's meat only, which is a very interesting role for the government to play. Like I said, this is a government administered kids club. So this is the context, this is the background. I do want to say that while these programs are traumatic for a lot of families and children, other families and children get through it and may have fond memories of it. Those may be families who have experience with hunting and fishing, and the children are not stretched beyond their emotional limits. Um, so many children, though, are very traumatized by what happens on auction day because once the auction is complete, the animals are loaded and they're sent off to be slaughtered, and their meat is sent to the buyer. Okay. So what happens on this day in July of 2022? My client, she's then 9 years old. She exhibits cedar. The highest bid was placed on behalf of State Senator Brian Dolly and his wife, Assembly Member Megan Dolly. At the time, State Senator Dolly was the Republican gubernatorial candidate, and he had an individual representing him in the auction. He placed the highest bid. After that highest bid was placed, my client started feeling the weight of the moment, and she decided that she wanted to leave with Cedar, her beloved goat. Okay, so here's a very important legal 101. We've all had agreements that we've made from time to time. If you rent an apartment, that's a lease agreement. When you buy something, that's an agreement to purchase that object. Many of us enter agreements daily. When you agree to do something and then you back out of it, the penalty in contract law is money damages. Now, if you are a child in the state of California, there is not even a penalty because children in the state of California, by statute, can leave any agreement because at the end of the day, a child should not be entering a contract. Okay, so under one view, this child can leave with her goat and there will be no consequences. Under the strictest view, this child can leave with her goat and her family has to reimburse the fare for whatever money that they're out. Um, so this family leaves with Cedar. The mom sent an email, hey, so sorry. We'll pay you whatever money you're out. We'll make it right with the buyer. We'll give you whatever money you need. This is when the fair really cracks down and insists you bring that goat back to be slaughtered, or we are getting law enforcement involved. Right, right. Now you can see this is a very ideologically motivated dispute because two neutral, reasonable parties would say, "I'm sorry your daughter had a hard time. All good." It really should have ended there. The dispute heightened. Law enforcement got involved. In the interim, the family placed Cedar hundreds of miles away at a ranch wall so that the family could resolve the dispute. Long story short, through a series of events, quite bizarre, several law enforcement officers end up driving in total something around 500 miles round trip. They have a warrant to breach entryways and break down doors to seize Cedar. They ultimately the location where they ultimately found Cedar was not a location that they had a warrant for. Law enforcement then turned over Cedar to the individual they believed was his rightful owner. We didn't know who that was at the time. And ultimately, we found out that Cedar's location was kept secret. Many government officials worked together, and ultimately, Cedar was killed weeks later. Now, the question is, what rights does this family have? And in this case, it's often we as animal advocates are upset that animals are considered property. In this particular circumstance, because Cedar was the property of this little girl and her mom, that gives them standing to sue both law enforcement and the state fair officials for illegally seizing her property in violation of the United States Constitution, among other claims. So this starts our civil rights litigation that went viral. It has maintained viral media coverage. It's probably the most reported on case in animal law. This case has been in active litigation since 2022. We did have a partial settlement with law enforcement for $300,000, which is the largest monetary recovery for an illegally slaughtered farmed animal. But we are still litigating against the state fair officials that not only operated the youth livestock auction, but the individuals who were involved in holding Cedar and coordinating his slaughter, despite being on notice of my client's claim that they owned him and that they would get a lawyer and exercise their legal rights.
My goodness. What a story. Now, how did this family find you? I see sometimes on bus stops and other things, various kinds
Mhm.
of lawyers offering their services. I don't think there's a bus stop that says animal law attorney.
Great question. So Advancing Law for Animals, we are a two-person team. It's myself and my co-founder, Ryan Gordon. Ryan is an excellent attorney, and he happens to be the only attorney that I am aware of who has ever been involved in a legal dispute involving a 4-H animal. And so in a prior legal dispute over the ownership of a 4-H animal, in that case, um, award award-winning songwriter Diane Warren had placed the highest bid for a lamb named Cotton at a 4-H youth livestock auction. And when her representative went to collect Cotton, the fair said, you can only have his meat. And so now you can imagine this is very odd. The client had purchased the animal and the fair said you cannot have him alive. And so it was Ryan who showed up bright and early at court to ask for a temporary restraining order, which is a unique form of legal relief, asking the judge to issue an order against the slaughterhouse saying, don't touch this lamb. There is a legal dispute over this lamb. Ryan's a great lawyer. He got that temporary restraining order. Ryan was ultimately able to negotiate for Cotton's release. And so we're not aware of any other lawyer ever navigating a 4-H legal dispute. And so Ryan's work on behalf of Advancing Law for Animals earned us this reputation, which led to our clients ultimately calling us.
Oh, my goodness. You are you're doing God's work if I've ever heard of anybody doing that. So for urban listeners, for people who have maybe heard of 4-H and don't know what the H's stand for
Mhm.
or what it's all about, what is this organization?
Yeah, so I might jumble it, but the 4-H's are, in no particular order, head, heart, hands, health. And so the 4-H's are supposed to be the pillar of the community. And I do want to stress that 4-H is a very broad program. And so it's not all children slaughtering animals. There's science, there's civics, there's tech, there's government. So it's a multifaceted youth development program, of which there are some programs relating to animals. And of those programs relating to animals, some of them involve children exhibiting animals for slaughter. And so if you are in a major city and you're ordering your cappuccino with your oat milk, you probably have no idea that elsewhere in the States, there are children raising animals for this a little known government program.
So, what are families to do when they're trying to raise children in an ethical way? And there's so much out there that is certainly not in alignment with how many of us see other than human beings. What do you, as a lawyer and as an ethical human being, say to parents?
Look, every family has to make choices for themselves. And there are families who choose to participate in the 4-H program, and it's positive or neutral for their family. And then there's families who choose to participate, and it's traumatic. And I think if you're a family who's entered into a contract to participate in a government kids club and you no longer want to be in it, I strongly, strongly recommend speaking to a lawyer practicing within the state to better understand your rights.
So I know that just because this case was and is huge and important, you don't just represent children whose animals have been seized. So give us a little bit of the range of the kind of work that you do.
Yeah, so all of our cases at Advancing Law for Animals are quite different, even though we, generally speaking, we specialize in issues impacting animals in experimentation and food production. That sounds very narrow, but it actually ends up being quite broad. And so, for example, in the past, we have sued laboratories for illegal business practices that also violate state anti-cruelty laws. We represent animal equality, for example, in a case against Foster Farms involving illegal business practices. We have a case pending against the National Institutes of Health regarding an illegal loophole benefiting foreign labs receiving US taxpayer dollars for animal experimentation. So every case, I gotta say, is really quite different.
And when you look at the law, I mean, I understand that as an attorney, you have to go to the court with existing laws that you can call on to make your case. So, where are we with the laws? I know that some of them seem to be decent in some areas, others seem very weak or non-existent. So, what laws do you pull out that are supportive and which ones really need to be stronger?
Well, I think we do have laws on the books that protect animals. The problem is they are unenforced or under enforced or haven't been applied as widely as perhaps they could be applied. And that's why it's important for creative lawyers to push the envelope and use these laws that we have in new ways. If we take a step back, though, there's the central feature of our legal system is that it is, if we want to get technical, welfarist, meaning it is legal to kill animals to eat them. It is legal to experiment on animals. But the law puts some restrictions on how we do that, right? So there's some red tape that if you are harvesting animals for food, if you are using them for science, you need to cross your T's and dot your I's. So the question for lawyers is really patrolling the perimeter of the conduct, right? It might be legal to raise and kill animals for food, but is this entity following the letter of the law and really scrutinizing the practices happening at that facility and really scrutinizing the law to understand how can we push the envelope here.
So I love all the things you're telling us about the law, about these fascinating cases. And I want to know about the fascinating person who's doing this. I mean, you're highly trained. You could be doing any sort of law, and yet you obviously followed your heart into
Mhm.
a small and pioneering field that is about compassion. So, who are you and how did you get to be you?
How did I get to be me? My personality is like a light switch. It's either on or it's off. And so I think for most of my career, my light switch was off because I wasn't what I call swimming with the current, swimming with my passion. It happens to be my greatest passion is for animals. I think fundamentally, when I hear something unfair or wrong happening to an animal, it it just triggers something within it. It's a place where I have to react. I think it's where I work out all unresolved anger, frustration, hopelessness I might have within this area.
So, were you one of those kids that was all about animals?
No, actually, no. It surprises a lot of people. We did have animals in the home. I grew up, there were dogs, there were cats, there were birds, but I never felt a strong connection to animals. As I got older, I entered law school and I happened to watch a documentary about animals factory farmed for food. And that changed everything for me because it was so obviously grotesque and immoral. And that moment changed my life. And I think at first it changed my life in small ways. I changed what I ate and I changed what I wore. But as each day progressively passed, I became more interested in, well, what about animals in laboratories? What about animals in entertainment? What about animals in the wild? What about animals in the pet trade? As you know, there's no end to the animal suffering. in every capacity, in every realm of society. And so the interest and the passion ballooned and it continued to grow over time until it became the enormity of it became such that I had to explode my normal life and take this on.
I love how you worded that. Explode your normal life and take this on. So
Mhm.
what would you say to a young person, an aspiring attorney, a law student who might be thinking about this? What's the life of an animal rights attorney like?
What is it like? So there's so many ways a person could practice animal law. And I really want to stress the scope and the flexibility so that law students understand it's not this thing that I either am or I am not, and it's a small window and I make it or I don't, right? So, you could be a staff attorney at a nonprofit law firm focused exclusively on animal issues. You could also have a traditional legal career and incorporate practice areas that involve animals. You could also have a traditional legal career and do animal law pro bono. You could, as a lawyer, do policy work and write or lobby for laws that help animals. You could be in-house at a company providing um, either resources or products for animals or alternatives for animal use. And so I think there's a lot of ways you could go about it. I've got to say, there's so many law students who want to do this work. And if you think about the most traditional route of being a staff attorney at an animal advocacy nonprofit, those are relatively limited roles compared to other fields. And so I always tell law students, you might not get your dream job out of law school. You might not get your second choice. You might not get your third choice. You might end up somewhere that you hate. I think, though, even when we are somewhere we don't want to be, we are unknowingly acquiring tools that are going to serve us as we evolve to the place that we truly desire. And so, for those who are interested in animal law, but they are doing civil litigation, those skills are instrumental. Those skills are absolutely instrumental. And it is wonderful to become the sharpest, brightest lawyer that you can, however you can, and translate those tools for animals when the moment presents itself in the trajectory of your career.
Mm. Beautiful. So, how do you see things right now? I think that a lot of us were looking at animal rights, we're looking at veganism, maybe around 2019 and thinking, whoa, it's happening. We're taking over the world, maybe not today, but before long. And now I think a lot of us are feeling there's a little bit of a pushback, a step back. So, where do you see things and what do we need to do to help them keep moving forward?
There's probably brighter and better minds mapping out the future. I think I try and keep it small and bite-sized. What can I do today?
What are you doing today? I know you can't talk about the particulars of an ongoing case, but what's your kind of 9 to 5 like?
So one of my cases that has been recently active is that case against the NIH. A lot of people don't know that every year the federal government hands out $20 billion with a B in taxpayer money to animal experimenters, both in the US and around the world. Foreign laboratories receive about 24% of that 20 billion. And so Congress passed a very common sense law that says basically, hey, if you're getting taxpayer money for animal experimentation, you need an animal care committee to assess the welfare of the animals, to audit and inspect the condition of the animals, to record the results of those inspections, to report to the agency on the welfare of the animals, like very common sense transparency metrics here. And the law is very clear. Every recipient getting money needs to do this. Surprisingly, the agency itself, the NIH, said, well, if you're a foreign recipient, you don't have to. And so the way that the separation of powers works is a federal agency cannot contradict the written law of Congress. And so That case has been progressing for a couple years, and we have just wrapped up briefing on it will be the final briefing on this issue, something called a motion for summary judgment, where we tell the judge, hey, this isn't about a fight over facts. This is just about applying the plain letter of the law. And so that briefing has just concluded. And so we look forward to a resolution of this case.
Oh gosh. Well, I hope you win, you and the animals. So
Thank you. Thank
what
you.
a pleasure to be speaking with you today. I do want to do a shout out to our sponsor for this episode, the good people of Compliment. These are wonderful supplements made by vegans for vegans. If you use the code Main Street, all capital letters, you get 10% off, not just on your first order, but on every subsequent order. So do check out Compliment. They have some wonderful new products. I'm liking one called Sulfura, which is that sulforaphane that we get from broccoli. But if we're not eating enough broccoli, hey, I just open up the little capsule and put it in my shake in the morning. So that website is lovecompliment.com. And speaking of websites, we will put all of the information about Vanessa and her nonprofit in the show notes at mainstreetvegan.com. But if you happen to be somebody with a good memory or you're holding a pencil, here's a couple of sites for you. VanessaShakib.com, Shakib. And also the nonprofit is advancinglawforanimals.org. And again, it'll all be in the show notes because that's what they're for. So, Vanessa, as we wind down, what's your greatest wish today for animals in this country and around the world?
I think my greatest wish is that we as a society every day awaken more and more to the basic reality that animals are individuals whose needs matter.
Couldn't have said it better. Thank you so, so very much, and wishing you all kinds of success as you continue to make history, which you are
Oh,
truly doing.
thank you. Thank you for having me. And by the way, just by sheer coincidence, I happen to take complement multivitamins myself.
Well, my goodness. See,
Mm-hmm.
we're all connected.
I'm on the right show. Yep.
Oh, that's
All
great.
right.
Wonderful to hear. Thanks everybody for listening. Makes you want to go out and tell every young person you know they should be thinking about animal law, right? Okay, everybody. God bless you. And let's just go out there and make Main Street vegan